Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and once again, we've got a situation.
Trump's deal isn't even really a deal.
Iran says it will reclose the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israel's continued strikes in Lebanon.
Where's that $300 billion to reconstruct Iran coming from?
President Trump said this would end with unconditional surrender, and it did, from us.
America faces the limits of its military power while the president threatens a return to war.
And the Park Service faces the limits of its cleaning power while the president threatens to jail alleged vandals. But first,
it was a strange choice of venue for President Trump to sign the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran, aiming to end a war which the American president began. The palace at Versailles in France, once home to King Louis XVI before he was guillotined, also the site of the peace treaty ending what was then called the Great War in 1919, a treaty which was a punitive document that helped to set the stage for an even deadlier world war 2 decades later. President Trump was handed the MOU by his Secretary of State Marco Rubio and scrawled his distinctive signature in felt-tip pen with the offhandedness of somebody paying a smallish bill. The memo had already been signed electronically by officials including Vice President Vance. A formal signing ceremony planned for Geneva in Switzerland was cancelled, and the first round of talks between the US and Iran were postponed when Israel got the memo calling for a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon and ignored it. They hadn't been part of negotiations, and according to an editorial in the Times of Israel, the MOU was a catastrophic capitulation. Israeli lawmaker Hanok Milvidsky from the ruling Likud party posted a video of himself removing a Trump MAGA hat and replacing it with a blue one and the Hebrew words for total victory. The first of the memo's 14 points included the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and for parties to refrain from the threat or use of force against each other. Trump breached that pretty much straight away when he threatened to use force again.
Let him know. I said, look, if you don't adhere to the agreement, I don't want to do that, but we're going to bomb the hell out of you. And I don't think that they're going to veer from the agreement. What else am I going to do? Am I going to say I'm going to take you to court?
The memo sets out a 60-day ceasefire to reach a final peace deal, unless both sides agree that they need more time. The US will fully end its naval blockade of Iran's ports within 30 days and undertakes to remove its forces from near Iran within 30 days of a final deal. In return, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days. In other words, open the Strait of Hormuz with the rest to be figured out later. But then came the controversial part, at least $300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development of Iran. Details again, still very much TBC, but a huge amount of money. And things got even better. For Iran, the US pledged to terminate all types of sanctions against Iran. All Iran has to do is affirm it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons.
which, of course, Iran was already promising even before the war.
Many times.
But while there's a lot of talk about that $300 billion number, arguably the most significant financial concession in that memorandum has no number attached to it at all. Paragraph 10 says the moment this memo was signed, immediately, America issued waivers so that Iran could sell oil on the open market, and they allowed all associated services such as banking, insurance and transportation. So Iran had to do nothing for that. That was automatic. And once those transactions were authorised, it broke open the entire core architecture of America's sanctions regime. It normalised Iranian oil trade with China, India and the UAE, and that made the prospect of re-establishing those sanctions extremely unlikely. So that's a huge concession in return for nothing. Not to mention adding $60 billion a year to the Iranian economy. Then after that, you've got the potential unfreezing of Iranian assets sometime in the future, but before a final deal. Now that's apparently worth $24 billion, although Iran thinks it might be worth up to $100 billion. And Trump releasing those funds might also be illegal, by the way, but no one seems to care about that, so let's move on to the bit after the final agreement. It's only then that Iran can possibly get their hands on that $300 billion of finance. So I wouldn't be focusing on that bit so much because I reckon it's pretty unlikely they're going to be reaching a final deal anytime soon. But leaving all that aside, more than $150 billion of those commitments have already been organised. Apparently the UAE has already agreed to pay $10 billion, maybe $20 billion according to some people, simply in return for Iran not attacking them anymore. And apparently the UAE has already physically paid Iran $3 billion of that money. And Iran is trying to arrange 2 more deals just like that with other countries. But I'm going to leave the last word on these payouts to Donald Trump himself from back in 2013, who wrote this about Obama's deal. What a rotten deal we made with Iran. We get nothing except laughter at our stupidity. They get everything, including delay and big cash. I suppose, John, America also did get that promise from Iran that they won't seek a nuclear weapon, the promise that they already had.
Many times over more than a decade. And as far as President Trump is concerned, stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is basically the whole ballgame. Speaking to Axios reporter Mark Caputo last week, he claimed this amounts to total victory.
Getting a conflict, you had talked about you only wanted unconditional surrender. And the MOU doesn't look like unconditional surrender.
Well, it really probably is unconditional surrender.
It is?
I think so.
The reaction in Washington, fair to say, not great. Certainly from many of Trump's fellow Republicans, it was scathing. $300 billion and a lifting of sanctions. They think Iran is arguably now in a better position than when the war began. Semaphor's Burgess Everett quoting one unnamed Republican senator as saying, "There is high-level dismay," adding it is unlikely that a final deal with Iran will ever be reached. Reporter David Schuster talking to an unnamed Republican operative who claimed that some GOP senators will support Trump's conviction and removal from office now if Democrats impeach him for what would be a 3rd time, describing their anger at Trump's deal as intense. Some were so angry they even spoke on the record, like Republican Senator Ted Cruz.
History demonstrates that giving billions of dollars to theocratic lunatics who want to murder us is an exceptionally bad idea. And I think, unfortunately, the president is receiving some really bad advice on this deal.
Speaking of bad advice, that is the same Ted Cruz who urged President Trump to attack Iran back in February and was then making bold predictions like this one.
And I think we will see a new regime in Iran, and a regime that is not focused on murdering Americans. And that transition, as I said, I think happens in the next few weeks.
And that was more than 3 months ago. Mississippi's Republican Senator Roger Wicker, he's the chair of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, he was another cheerleader for Trump's war effort in Iran, warned that this memorandum of understanding negotiates away the victories of Operation Epic Fury, and the $300 billion reconstruction fund would, quote, make Iran's payoff under President Obama's 2015 deal look like a pittance by comparison. Louisiana's Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who lost a primary to a Trump-backed rival last month, went even further.
This will go down as a tremendous foreign policy blunder. Iran ends up stronger, our allies in the region are weaker, and Iran has learned that if they're willing to grab that Strait of Hormuz and choke it off, they can get the Western world to dance to their tune. I think it's a deep mistake.
Meanwhile, the best that Republican Senator Lindsey Graham could say about the memo was a tepid, well, the jury's still out.
Does this create a pathway to peace throughout the region, or is it sort of a tactical setback for Iran? Time will tell, but I'm glad we're on the course, on the path to diplomacy.
Honestly, John, I can understand why some Republicans are annoyed. We've travelled a very long way from back when Trump promised there'll be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. Now, to be fair, this is only a memorandum of understanding, okay? So things can change for the better, but they can also change for the worse. Trump, though, says that he's going to be keeping those shifty Iranians in line.
Memorandum of understanding, and if I don't like it, we'll go back to shooting at them, dropping bombs on their head. If I don't like it, if they don't behave, we'll go right back to dropping bombs right smack in the middle of their head.
Oh, some tough talk there, John, but really? Trump seems to be backing these guys pretty hard.
Dealing with people that I think are very rational people. I mean, they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people. I think actually they're smarter than the first and second group. But they're not radicalized, and they're, looking to help their country.
And Trump's clearly suggesting that any more war could lead to a depression.
If we didn't do this deal, you would never have success. Your market would have, instead of going up at levels that nobody's ever seen before, would go down at levels that nobody ever saw before, maybe except for 1929 or whatever.
So, I don't think Trump is going to be bombing Iran anytime soon again. And this is probably it for what he's going to get out of the war. So, should we break it down? We've got the original goals of the war versus what Trump's actually achieved. Now, the very first thing Trump said he wanted out of this war way back on day one was simple. All I want, he said, is freedom for the people. Remember that? The month before, he tweeted out, "Iranian patriots, keep protesting. Help is on its way." So how did that work out? Well, paragraph 2 of the memorandum explicitly states that Iran and America promised to not interfere in each other's internal affairs. So I guess help won't be on the way. Or as J.D. Vance puts it,
if the Iranian people want to rise up, great. That's their business. That's between them and their government.
Do you hear the people sing? J.D., so inspirational. Moving on to this promise.
We're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
You got that? No more proxy groups fighting for Iran, except paragraph 1 of the memorandum, straight out of the gate, explicitly protects Hezbollah from being attacked. And when asked if Hezbollah would be receiving a share of Iran's unfrozen funds, Hezbollah's media office sure seemed to think so. On to the next objective.
Goals of this mission are clear, and it's important to continue to remind the American people of why it is that the greatest military in the history of the world is engaged in this operation. It is to destroy the ability of this regime to launch missiles, both by destroying their missiles and their launchers, destroy the factories that make these missiles, and destroy their navy.
Well, they certainly destroyed Iran's navy. That is a tick. Not that Iran needed their navy to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. A combination of speedboats and drones pretty much did the trick. But apart from the navy, Rubio talked a lot in that clip about ballistic missiles. So how's that going? Well, this is what Trump said last week directly in front of Rubio's face.
And I have guys, I like some of these guys, but I don't think they're smart. Sir, you shouldn't let them have any missile. I said, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to let Saudi Arabia have missiles, but they can't have them? Yes, sir. It doesn't work that way, It doesn't work that way.
Awkward. And Bloomberg last week reported that Iran has likely reconstituted large swathes of its missile arsenal. They're now packing about 3/4 of the munitions they started the war with, and they can easily build more. They've even added brand new Russian weapons to their arsenal. Don't tell Marco. Now, we've already mentioned Iran's pinky promise that they won't be building a bomb. But at the start of the war, Trump wanted a lot more than that. He wanted no enrichment of uranium whatsoever. And he wanted to dig up and remove all the highly enriched nuclear material that Iran already has. Recall, the nuclear dust. Well, this is how the no enrichment goal's progressing.
It is a little hard, though, when you say that somebody wants it, other people have it, other adjoining states have it, and you're not letting them have it for purposes of electricity and things like that. It's always a little tough. You have to use a little common sense, please.
Yeah, you do. And this is how they're progressing towards digging up that highly enriched uranium.
You could make the case, why are you even bothering? Because it's not really valuable. It's, it's probably $500,000 worth. It's not very valuable stuff. But I think psychologically we want to get it.
So in summary, Trump's war objectives seem to have evolved quite a lot. These are his objectives now.
On Sunday, we reached an agreement with Iran that achieves everything we set out to accomplish, everything and much more. Ending the current conflict, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. That's what it was all about.
So 2 of the 3 objectives now are ending the war that Trump started, and the third objective he hasn't achieved yet. Also notice that Trump didn't even mention that when the Strait of Hormuz opens, it should be toll-free. Maybe that's because the memorandum only guarantees a toll-free Strait of Hormuz for 60 days. And while the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson stated that Iran doesn't seek to collect transit tolls, he also said they do intend to collect fees from ships for navigation services, environmental protection, ship insurance, and other necessary services. So in summary, John, I can totally understand why Republicans might not be thrilled with this MOU, although they do seem to be adjusting to it quite quickly, I think. The day after Lindsey Graham expressed his misgivings before, he was tweeting, "I just had a lengthy and productive discussion with Steve Witkoff. It's my opinion that signing the MOU will be beneficial to the United States." How about that? It won't be long till Lindsey Graham is right next to MAGA simp Jack Posobiec tweeting out, "Best Iran deal that's ever been made. Nobel Peace Prize material for President Trump."
Yeah, we'll see about that. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been careful not to criticise Trump directly or the MOU, unlike some members of his government. But Bibi has been keen to point out that Israel is not a signatory to this deal. And he says his bottom line remains the same.
With an agreement, without an agreement, Iran will not have nuclear weapons today or tomorrow. As long as I am the Prime Minister of Israel, this will not happen.
Maybe so, but the concern from US intelligence agencies, John, was that Netanyahu might intentionally undermine an attempted peace deal with Iran. Certainly both Hezbollah and Israel attacked each other sporadically after the deal was signed, but then, after 4 IDF soldiers were killed in an attack by Hezbollah, Israel dropped any restraint whatsoever, and they killed at least 83 people and wounded 141, according to the Lebanon Ministry of Health. And Israel's National Security Minister, Jen Gavito, does not sound like he was in much mood for peace when he tweeted out, "For every tear of an Israeli mother, 1,000 Lebanese mothers must weep. All of Lebanon must burn." He's like a modern-day Gandhi, isn't he? And all that is what caused JD Vance to postpone his trip to Switzerland for peace talks. What America would have been most fearing, I imagine, John, is if Israel restarted this war, they were dangerously short of ballistic missile interceptors. Israel I'm talking about here, and that would have placed a lot of pressure on America to defend them when America doesn't have a huge number of interceptors to spare either. It's a real problem. Anyway, things seem to have moved on a little, at least. So JD Vance has headed back to Switzerland for those peace talks with Iran, which is interesting in itself, given the thoughts that Vance has recently shared about Israel's conduct.
Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
And JD's pretty obviously already been set up as Trump's fall guy if this deal doesn't come off.
I just wonder if the vice president, who was against this, by all reports, was against the conflict to begin with, maybe he wasn't the right person to bring this conflict to an end. We'll find out.
There's a lot of uncertainty and distrust out there at the moment, John. It is a very, very delicate situation.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's fair to say that JD Vance has a tricky balancing act on his hands, talking to the Iranians in Lucerne, while President Trump is back home threatening to literally blow up those diplomatic efforts. For more on all of this, we spoke to Jen Gavito. She is a veteran diplomat and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Iraq and Iran in the Biden administration. Jen Gavito, welcome to Planet America. What have you made of reaction to the Memorandum of Understanding, particularly what we're hearing from some Republicans and from Israel as well?
Reactions from U.S. domestic political members, I think, has been predictable for a memorandum of understanding that largely is a case of cutting losses. I don't think that anyone is arguing that this puts the United States in a stronger strategic position. What it does is extract the U.S. from a war that had ever diminishing returns and arguably not a great strategic vision even when it was launched. And so while the advantages to the US are fairly limited, it does end the conflict, at least for now, addresses the nuclear program in presumably some way, and most importantly for President Trump, it gets global commerce moving again. When it comes to Israel, I think that we should have acknowledged much earlier in the conflict that US and Israeli national security interests would diverge. For Israel, nothing short of regime change that completely eliminated Iranian capabilities to strike out at Israel, or for that matter, Gulf allies, would have been enough. That is a very different place from where President Trump is. And so I'm not at all surprised that across the political spectrum in Israel, this is being met with considerable dismay.
Now, as you say, this MOU isn't ideal for Trump, but given the position that Trump found himself in last week, has this MOU made the best of a bad situation at least? Or do you think Trump could have extracted more from Iran?
So he famously once made a comment that Iran had never won a war, but never lost a negotiation. And I think, unfortunately, the Trump administration is finding that to be very true. Iran emerges from this conflict feeling like it is in a fairly strong negotiating position, and therefore was not particularly inclined to make significant concessions when negotiating with the United States. But I think your characterization of making the best of a bad situation here is absolutely right. There was not a situation in which continued military conflict was likely to change Iranian red lines or their negotiating calculus. All it would continue to do would be to disrupt global commerce, the global economy, and therefore make the situation for President Trump even more difficult as global, for example, oil supplies continued to dwindle.
At this point, how likely do you think a robust agreement coming out of this process is going to be that will give the United States and Israel the certainty that they're seeking, that Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon and will not keep closing the Strait of Hormuz or levying a toll?
So first of all, I think that in the days since the MOU was signed, we've seen the challenge of the Strait of Hormuz going forward. And that is that it is forever a tool that Iran will have in its toolkit. So that is extremely problematic. As far as a final deal, at the end of these 60 days, I think that is probably a non-starter. This is probably a good time to remind people that the JCPOA took some 2.5 years to negotiate. So I think 60 days is highly optimistic. It probably is a bit too premature to lay out what the expectations are of what could be achieved. But what the United States will be looking for in these nuclear negotiations would be some agreement on downblending or destroying the highly enriched uranium. That will take much longer than 60 days, even if general agreement is reached. There will need to be some sort of international verification regime that includes the IAEA oversight. So I hope that there's a deal in the offing. I hope that markets and transit in particular continue to stabilize, but I'm not very optimistic that we're looking at any sort of grand bargain at the end of this MOU period.
Now, both Trump and Vance seem to have some faith in the current Iranian leadership. They say, hey, these are rational people. If America offers them enough carrots, they might just take some of those carrots, and that would be good, not just for America and Iran, but for the whole world. What's your reaction to that?
So first of all, I don't think that anyone that is familiar with Iran or the Iranian regime ever would have argued that Iran is not a rational actor. They have always been rational in their positions. It believes and continues to believe that it has a right to nuclear technology. It believes that it must retain its ability to project power through its proxies like Hezbollah and like the Houthis. And it believes that it must maintain a robust program of missile and drone technology in order to establish deterrence. None of those things have changed, and there is no indication that, rational or not, that the current structure of the regime is in any frame of mind to depart from those red lines. And so the question becomes, how much is the United States willing to concede in order to make some incremental progress on the margins of those areas? But again, I do not necessarily attribute good faith when it comes to Iranian negotiations. And I believe that they will do everything in their power, overtly and covertly, to continue to adhere to the red lines that I just laid out.
For those who love a good metaphor, it's kind of irresistible. It was supposed to only take days and cost little to fix a problem that other presidents had failed to fix. Instead, it's an expensive mess of Trump's own making. No, not Iran's nuclear program, the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool.
Tonight, Washington's iconic reflecting pool is looking dirty and green. The brand new coat of blue paint already peeling off the bottom.
It's just 2 weeks since this pool was refilled following a $14 million renovation, which included that painting of the interior with a waterproof membrane. And it's fair to say it hasn't quite lived up to the president's hopes.
You're going to have something you're going to be very proud of, and it'll last for 50 to 100 years before you have to do anything with it. Very strong, powerful substance that we use. And we picked a color called American Flag Blue.
But within days, the water in the 600-metre-long, 25 million litre reflecting pool was turning bright green. At first, the Trump administration said it was residual algae from the filtration system, but it continued to spread, and things went from bad to worse last week when the blue paint appeared to start lifting away in sheets. Nobody knows for sure why. Maybe it had something to do with the National Park Service workers pouring hydrogen peroxide into the water to combat the algae growth. Peroxide is used in spas and natural swimming pools as a less harsh alternative to chlorine, but it's also used in paint removers. Or maybe it was just a dodgy paint job in the first place from a pool guy that Trump gave the no-bid contract to. Either way, visitors to the pool last week weren't too impressed.
I want my money back after seeing this.
President Trump had been very keen to claim credit for the idea of painting the pool to stop the leaks rather than the more expensive option of repairing the granite and concrete slabs at the bottom.
We made the surface as good as it can be, and we're now covering it with the most beautiful blue, very thick. You think of it as a very sophisticated form of rubber. No leaks, no problems.
Well, a few problems. President Trump now claims, without providing any evidence, that this must be the work of vandals.
They took some form of knife or blade and put a 250-foot-long gash into the beautiful facade of what took so much work, competence, and money to build and complete.
You'd think somebody would have noticed somebody doing that, but okay, what else did they do?
They also poured corrosive and destructive chemicals into the pool.
Maybe. Among the accused vandals is David Carter Hearn. He's a 3-time Olympian who says he just reached down to touch a strip of that peeling blue paint mixed in with the algae. Park police arrested him, accusing him of destroying government property. He now faces a potential 10-year jail sentence and denies the charge. At this point, Chaz, I don't know, it might be just easier to change the blue on the American flag to a nice shade of algal green.
When we say paint, it wasn't classic paintbrush style blue paint on the bottom of the pool. They just applied a blue waterproof liner. And apparently they did it in a fairly hasty fashion, hence it falling apart at the moment. But we don't need a conspiracy to explain all this algae. This has been happening during the hottest part of the year, when algae flourishes. And by the way, installing a dark blue liner only traps more heat, making a shallow pool even more of an algae incubator. In fact, according to the Washington Post, there's currently more algae in the reflection pool than there's been at this time of year for at least 5 years. That's why it looks like Shrek's taking a bath in it. There's no mystery about this. And even less mystery that Trump might have some problems after awarding part of the assignment to a long-time supporter who was given that no-bid contract that John mentioned before, and whose company, by the way, is called green water services. What did you expect to happen, Donald? And the Trump buddy who owns this company is this guy here, John J. Cafaro. What could possibly go wrong with that dude? I don't know. Sometimes it just feels, John, like Trump's taking the piss.
This Pride Month, a movie about a man looking for peace, who ends up finding love.
He was in a hotel, and I met him, and we fell in love, deeply in love.
Again.
So you look at this man. He's the most beautiful-looking man. He looks so nice. He's like an angel.
And again.
What a nice-looking person. I could put him in a movie right now.
A story about accepting your sexuality.
This was not the lifestyle that they were taught to have.
Exploring your boundaries.
Do we do it? Do you like doing it or not? He says, sure, if you want to do it, we can do it.
And letting love win.
We met. We had great chemistry. I stayed twice as long as I was supposed to.
Starring Benjamin the Bear Netanyahu.
Bibi Netanyahu gets a little excited sometimes.
Diplomatic sex symbol Donald Trump.
It was a lot of work last night.
And in his Oscar-nominated debut performance, Steve.
You shot your load pretty much, Steve, right?
This summer's ultimate gaycation movie. What happens at the G7 stays at the G7. In cinemas now.
And that's it for another trip to Planet America. Join us at the same time next week for our final episode of this season. We're going to take a short break, then back in mid-August for the run-up to November's midterm election.
You can also find us on ABC iView and online. And on this week's Pet Podcast, we're going to be talking a whole lot about that pesky memorandum as well as the humble screw worm. See you there.
Bye-bye.